Hi everyone, Joe March here, also known as Sorcerer, and this is going to be the last video of 2024, and I hope you're not completely tired of all these 2024 recap videos, because we're about to go over some old stuff, yay, which is actually the topic of this video. I've been getting a lot of people commenting on my most recent video, The Path of the Gods, saying that this is all stuff that we've heard before. And yeah, some of it is. And a lot of that was on purpose. I did put out this video toward the end of the year, and I do have plans that if I talk about my path going forward, that it is going to be stuff that doesn't touch on what we talked about this year and last year, which has been a lot of information on Tiamat, on the mother archetype, on the father archetype, and all that stuff. But it was kind of purposefully mirroring all the stuff we've talked about, because it was taking the new concept that I have, the new thing I'm walking into called the Path of the Gods, and then what from that vantage point would all this old stuff I've worked on look like. So when I started working this new path, part of it was to start working with the gods to understand this, that, and the other thing, and we'll get into that. But the easiest place to start is to look at what you already have experienced and go, well, how does this stack up now with this new thing? And so I had written some things on that, and I decided, I'm pretty firm on those, even though I'm not as firm on the other stuff I'm working on right now, so I think I can share that. And I also felt like in my old video, what was it called? How Have You Been? I mentioned that I was going to start talking about the father archetype that I had been blending with the mother archetype at that time to create this connection to the all, but I never did that. I never made the video on the father. So I figured two birds with one stone. We'll talk about the mother archetype, which is going to sound like a repeat. We'll talk about the eternity, which again is going to sound like a repeat, but now we're doing it with the added information of how the father plays into all that. So I felt like the repeated information was important to grasp the full concept of the mother, father, and eternity. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe I should have just gone over the father and not touched on that. Also, I didn't really need it to be part of the video about ego death or about the Path of the Gods. But I felt like it needed to be there. Like the part of me that is a storyteller, the part of me that wants to have things have a conclusion, felt that 2024 needed finality in that father information that I said I was going to put out, so that I could let that go and move on to the next thing. So if you thought, hey, a lot of this sounded like repeat, it did, and it was kind of supposed to. And I think I did a poor job of expressing that was what I was doing with that portion of the video, that 50% of that video was going to be recapping everything that I'd kind of come to understand over the past 2 years. But there's a reason why I wanted to do that, and I think that'll become clear shortly in this video. All that said, why make a video about that? Well, that's only part of the thing. A lot of people who said that I've been repeating myself also mentioned something about being worried that my path was stagnating, that I wasn't changing, that I was kind of circling the same thing again and again. And that wasn't necessarily what everyone said, but that's what the main one that made me say, you know what, I need to address this, made me think. Because there's a few reasons why it could look that way from outside, but I think it won't look that way if you understand what's been going on with me. I think it mostly comes down to us placing ourselves in our own skin whenever we're listening to a video like this. Like if you listened to me talk about Veritas Tiamat 2 years ago and you already were on board with what I was saying in that video, you would have been like, yeah, Joe's finally there. But in reality, Veritas Tiamat was an experiment I did to try to see what happens if I try to just channel stuff. Does it just give me my own mind, like what I want things to be like, or does it give me some kind of like otherworldly explanation of things, or like what is it? And then I read it off as part of that experiment. It wasn't until 3 months ago, I think, that I finally had that big explosion of like, oh, all this stuff I've been going through this year is exactly what I talked about in Veritas Tiamat a year before. That the stuff that I had channeled was actually now making sense to me in a way that when I read it off, I was like, well, this just sounds like poetic, interesting stuff, but now it actually makes sense. So if you understood it back when I read it, and to me it was like poetry, to you, you'd be like, he already gets this. No, I didn't. And so if it sounds like now I'm restating stuff that I said 2 years ago, but I'm saying it like, holy shit, guys, this stuff's real. That's because that's where I'm at. I'm at the point of like, wait, this wasn't bullshit. This was real. You guys were already there before me. So you're like, he's slow. That's fine. I'm getting there, guys. I'm getting there. And they might think that it's circling, that it's like, hey, he's doing the same thing again, except that I didn't understand it the first time. There's a difference between when you understand something as opposed to when you just speak it. So I think it's not necessarily clear if you're just consuming my videos and it's been 2 years since you heard the original idea and you hear me say it again and you think this is an idea you said before. It's like, technically, yes. But if you're me, this is very new to embody these concepts as opposed to just state what people and philosophies of the past have said about them, or to state something that was channeled but not really understood inside. And that's why I wanted to address this stagnant comment. Like, my path isn't stagnant, even though it might be boring. Those are two different things. It might be boring to you because you've heard me at the start say, hey, this might be true. In the middle, say, whoa, this seems to be true. And at the end, say, hey, this is true. And you're like, I didn't need it 3 times. I understand that. That's my bad. I don't need to give you guys the same stuff 3 times. But I also have this feeling that some of the viewers out there just want to see where I'm at and may be able to pick up that difference between like when I'm like, hey, here's a concept, and later I'm like, oh my God. Like, to me, it's big. There's also a lot of other things going on with my practice right now that would show it definitely isn't stagnant and it is definitely moving me in a brand new direction. But I feel like I maybe did a disservice by not talking about any of the new direction I was going in that video. So I'm going to talk about some of that at the end of this video, give you guys an idea where I'm actually heading. What I really wanted to do, in the spirit of, those review videos that you get, is go over all the steps in my path from back in 1996 forward in a quick overview to kind of show how much my views on these things have changed till now and when that happened. Because I think if you see it laid out, you're going to go, oh, never mind. So in 1996, when I was 16, I performed my first ritual, mostly as a joke, but results changed the way I view this stuff. I don't get into my life back then, but it was enough for me to go like, maybe something's there. In 1998, I started diving into the occult, but I was an armchair type of occultist. I was not a practitioner. That one ritual was enough for me, and it was more like, what's really going on here? I'm just curious. I did some dabbling over the years after that, but mostly it was just research. In 2004, I started studying different traditions and religions and practicing a few of those. That's whenever I finally stopped being Christian, was a few years prior to that, but had now started finding other things to try as opposed to just being like, oh, well, who knows? In 2009, that's when I went from researching the occult, dabbling a little, studying different religions and trying out those religions to practicing magic, occult magic, doing rituals, all that type of stuff, learning about Golden Dawn, learning about other things. This is where that started. 2014, Psycho Sorcerer channel is born. That's the channel most of you guys know about. That's where most of you met me back in the day. It's born out of my desire to share my experiences and some fundamentals. At the time, I felt like there wasn't good magic channels out there, primarily because people weren't showing their faces or people were giving it like a snake oil salesman-y type of look. And I was into the psychological model at this point, so I thought this is actually something that can help people if you understand that it's not something that should be taboo. So I wanted to be the first practitioner that came on there and said, I practice, but you could see my face and see I was a regular person. And at that time, that was new. That's not new anymore, but that was like my entire reason for doing this. Eventually, I covered all the topics I had, and I started sharing my own journey and interviews instead. But that's because I actually went over everything that I'd learned in the previous years in that channel. Now, what I went over in that channel was primarily knowledge-based, though. It doesn't mean that I had that deep understanding, had been through the path, and etc. at that point. It was more like I had studied a lot, and I had done some magic, and I wanted to share conceptually what I had pulled together from all these sources that back then was hard to get online. So in 2016, I completed my first shadow work, and that changed me. I started that in 2015, but finished it in 2016, and I have this experience at the time that I would say is an indescribable experience of love. This is what I would call an enlightenment experience today, but I was like, holy shit, and it changed me to the core. Like, I was a fearful person who believed in this practice of magic primarily to protect myself or to become stronger or whatever. I lived in a place of fear. I didn't think I did, but I definitely came at things from that point of view prior to this point. And after the shadow work of reintegrating these parts of myself that I had rejected, I started to see the world in a whole different way. Like, there was love there that I didn't have before. So this rocked my shit. And I can't stress that enough. People were like, hey, he finally found it. Cool, but it was a bigger thing to me. It was rough. So at that point, I also started to embrace the spiritual model over the psychological. So up until this point, I've been teaching this stuff from a psychological point of view. And I think a large part of that was because to look at it any other way was kind of scary to me at that point. Also, in between these 2 points is when I started working with Tiamat. And Tiamat originally appeared to me as this giant, scary monster that was larger than anything I'd ever experienced before in this vision that I had. But now when I think of Tiamat, she's like this lovely person that I work with. And it's because I believe she represented the outside world and nature as I saw it then and as I see it now. And that is how it has changed over time. But anyway, back in 2016, after the shadow work, this is my first time having gone through something through all of this time that literally changed me. That it wasn't just like a spell to try to get something or a spell to try to do something. And it's from that point forward that I'm never going to really use spells the same way again. So I changed the channel to the Grand Infinity and embraced the spiritual model over the psychological. This would later turn out to be the wrong thing to do. See, I thought, I've been wrong about it being the psychological model all this time. It must have been the spiritual model. I'm going to embrace spirits and spiritism and all of these things, right? But I didn't fully embrace the ideas of, say, the eternity. Even though I was experiencing it, I was calling it the Grand Infinity. I kind of had an idea of it. It was like, I saw it as like God is everything, but I didn't understand how we were a part of that yet. Not really. I had experienced it for a moment, and then I experienced this better life as a result of that one moment. But I hadn't understood it. I just was in it, if that makes sense. So I leaned into the spiritual model there for a while. 2017 to 18, I can't remember where, I end and delete my channel after going through an experience that completely upends everything I thought I knew about these topics. I was convinced that I was like leading people the wrong way with my old stuff, the old Sorcerer channel stuff, and since it was searchable from online, people could just go find those topics, even though those weren't my new topics anymore. And they were asking me about it all the time, and people were like, hey, I made a servitor, and then I ended up in a mental institution and things. And I started feeling this sense of responsibility for what I put out, as opposed to before that, where I was just like, someone needs to share this, everything should be shared. Now I was like, wait, actions have consequences. New me that has gone through the shadow work and has experienced love doesn't want to hurt people. And it's not that old me wanted to, but it rocked me. So I was like, I got to take away parts of the channel, this and that. But then like there was this other thing happening where I was no longer able to speak to Tiamat or the Morgan or any of the people who had helped me with the shadow work, any of these gods. It was only me and the Grand Infinity. And that scared me. And I was fighting between this love and fear thing. And I started to recognize that the spiritual model also didn't explain it. But I hadn't grasped yet that the psychological and spiritual model are flawed because it's both. And it's not that I at times during this had said it's both. But when I said that, I was like, it seems to be both, as in I don't understand how it's both. But it seems to somehow appear in both places. I still had them separate in my mind. Later in my practice, which we'll get to, I come to understand why it's both. That the psychological is not all just here. It's the entirety of everything. And then once you start to understand that, all of the rest of it clicks into place. Instead of it being like, is it one or the other? It's like, no. It's actually, to say it's both is almost wrong. It's neither of those things. It's different. So anyway, 2017, 2018, I delete my channel after going through experiences that completely upend everything I thought I knew about these topics. I kind of crash and burn hard. I burn all of my journals and start completely fresh. I was like, I'm just going to start over. I'm not going to be the person who people are looking at. My channel had over 20,000 subs. I was getting a lot of views. I was like, I don't want to be the leader of this. I got afraid of that responsibility. So instead of what I know now would be the better thing to do, instead of just being responsible for my content and curating it, I was like, fuck all that. I also was experiencing that all of the old ways I did things weren't working for me anymore, and there was no new way to do the old type of magic. I couldn't, ask for shit now. Now I had to work on myself, and I didn't know how to do that after the shadow work, so I just kind of, lost it. So after I did all that, I dove into this dark night of the soul, where I started to question if any of the magic had ever worked in the first place. It almost felt like I forgot it all. And in retrospect, a lot of times when I look at it, it feels like what really happened is Tiamat said, you need to start over from the ground up as someone who hasn't even done this. Like as if you need to grow as a new tree from nothing. And so I experienced this deep depression, this dark night of the soul that I went through until I found existentialism. And I completely abandoned spirituality, magic, all that stuff, and just became someone who was confident in themselves. Like, I give myself purpose. And I didn't realize at that time is that is an important part of unity with the grand infinity, the all, the eternity, whatever you want to call it. I didn't know that then. I just knew that was what I needed. And so I started to find that I still had that love that I had found, but I had it within me. I loved myself. I loved the world, regardless of any need for there to be any spirituality. And that was healing for me. And I think during this time, I also let go of a lot of things that you can't see here that were clinging on to me. These old ideas of what magic must be, or how powerful you could be, or this or that. That there was a lot from my days in fear that stayed with me even after I had the love experience that still needed purged and wasn't going to get purged till I purged everything. So this felt like a great purging of all of that. It took the new stuff semi with it too. But in the end, as I came through it, I still had the love and I had confidence in myself suddenly. So in 2019, I started a new channel simply called Joseph March, where I do whatever I want after being urged by other people to make PP Sorcerer and Reggie skits. So these were people who watched my old channel and said, you know you don't do magic anymore. I know you're out, as you said, because I say I'm out. But, they'd talk to me, and I'm still talking philosophy and religions and everything. So they're like, you're only kind of out. You're not really out, but you say you're out. Why don't you make some videos that are just some funny videos? You want to do it. You like the community. You miss certain people. I've expressed that I felt bad about deleting my channel instead of kind of archiving it so that people could always find it if they needed, but it wasn't being served by the algorithm. I got this chance basically to redeem that, to say, hey, if you want the old videos, if you're an old fan, you can find them, but also they're not going to be on YouTube directly where people are just hitting them, but also here I am now with my new ideas. You can see that I've been through that path and ended up here. A cautionary tale, maybe, but for the most part, I'm just going to make some funny skits and some funny music. So 2020, 2021, things happen in my life that bring me back into spirituality. Not into the spiritual model, but Tiamat is basically back. The Morgan is back, in a way. Ishtar's back in a way, but they're all one thing. It's like the eternity decided to wear a mask and show itself to me at that point. So I start to re-explore all of what I used to believe, but from a new point of view. This becomes my content again for a while, and eventually the channel gets renamed Psycho Sorcerer 2.0, but this is primarily because I'm job searching at this time, and I don't want all these skits that I've made that are a little uncouth to be the first thing that pops up when people are looking up Joseph March. I realized it was a bad idea to name my channel Joseph March. And since now I'm talking about magic and stuff again, I'm like, let's call it Psycho Sorcerer 2.0. Other people who knew the old channel might find me again if they're interested in what I'm up to. But at this point, the channel is no longer specifically for skits, and the old channel's idea of being like, I'm going to give you information that's hard to get, that's gone too. Now it's just a video blog of where I'm at with occasional skits. 2021-2022, Tiamat becomes a major force in my life once more, as she was previously, but now in a positive way. I come to understand the concept of magic as both being spiritual and psychological, as we just discussed a little bit ago. And it's more than just the one-off comment of that. I get it. I'm kind of like, oh, I get how this works and how I start to be shown by Tiamat how to unite with the All, which I later come to call the Eternity, through this process of merging with Tiamat. And I talk openly about that on the channel, and I'm kind of back as a person who's a practitioner, openly expressing that I'm a practitioner. But I'm only working with Tiamat. I don't work with other gods. I don't work with any specific traditions. I work with Tiamat. And I talk about what happens. 2022 to 2023, I embraced the left-hand path practices as a result of letting go of the old dogma that I had believed in that was keeping me in some of the right-hand path. So for all this time before that, I claimed to be middle path, but really I was right-hand path. I was still held on to certain dogmatic beliefs, and Tiamat said I needed to break those. So I broke out of those, I went left-hand path, and what I would later come to find is that neither path is correct, and that it isn't really a middle path and that there's both paths. It's that those paths are not real. That is not how any of this works. But at this point, I went left-hand path practices. I put my faith in Tiamat ahead of any traditions and the like to experience what happens if I dive fully into her teachings. And this is where we end up getting things like Veritas Tiamat, which is the next line on here. March through July of 2023, I write Veritas Tiamat as a channeled document from Tiamat. This is primarily an exercise to see if what I channel turns out to be anything more than what I would come up with on my own. I'm still, even though we've talked about Tiamat for years at this point, and we've talked about all these other practices, I am still at this point only just to the point where I trust that process. Where it's not just something I'm trying. I am now invested in working with Tiamat from 2021 on. I am now back to magic in the sense of journeying, visions, etc., at that point, after having not done it for years, after having gone away from it. So then we get to October 2023, where I experience union with the All, the Eternity again. This is the first time since the Grand Infinity. This causes me to drop the left-hand path practice, as we've talked about why. Let go of the left and right as concepts. At this point, I feel as if I've reached the same point I had reached back in the Grand Infinity days. I've come back around to understanding that love and understanding that this is coming from the Eternity of the All. It's not just the lip service of there's this concept of the All. It's wait, this has happened again. But now, this time, I had gone through the steps. I had gone the right way about it to get there, is what it felt like. Instead of doing a shadow work, having it happen, and then freaking out. So now I'm I'm faced with this again. It's happening again. This time, instead of freaking out, I need to embrace this and move forward. So I have a new understanding. I have a stronger foundation. It keeps me from losing myself in the transition. That leads us to 2024. Now, keep this in mind. That was October 2023. We are only a little over a year since that happened to me. So keep that in mind whenever you're saying, how far am I on whatever path? That, this just happened a year ago. 2024. I once again explore the topics of the eternity, the gods as archetypal forces, and the union of opposites, which leads to transcendental ideas like Teotl, Brahman, and the Tao as a means to understand the eternity. While I do this, I work with Tiamat to restore this connection multiple times, experiencing the connection to the eternity again and again. This is where I was able to prove to myself that I can make this connection, and eventually to understand that the connection is always there. That we don't have to connect to it. It's always there. You just have to realize it's there. Which is a big part of these other traditions. Now, I've had people say, why not just use these other traditions? Well, I wasn't there, was I? I wasn't at that point. I didn't know about that. I had read many of these things years ago, and it didn't work for me. But now, because of the experiences, it does. So all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, all these things I read about before, I get it now. I get it in a way I didn't when I talked about it the first time. So now we get to late 2024, and I wrote a lot of stuff on these next sections because I feel like I didn't explain a lot of this well, and it's stuff that maybe you guys should hear. So this is the part of the video that I was saying I would talk more about what's happened on the path, on the new stuff. So late 2024, something happens in my personal practice, which I've not shared publicly, that causes me to accept the masculine aspects of the eternity into me alongside Tiamat. Basically, an intense spiritual journey, rivaling any vision or ritual I've had, which is dreamlike but feels real enough that I feared for my own life, in which I risked my soul just to bring Absu back to Tiamat so they could be in balance. Once rejoined, they danced together, and I felt as if the Tiamat inside of me transformed as well, and it leaves me completely. But in its place, I can now reach out to the eternity on my own. Up until this point, I've only worked with Tiamat and connected to the eternity through her, not through practices that would not require the aid of a god. And I have refused to work with other gods. Now Tiamat has left me, as occurred back in the Grand Infinity days. But I understand now that the leaving is a good thing. That it isn't like I've lost that. It's that part of me has now found closure. It has come to balance between the father and mother aspect, and I no longer need to lean on it. So, the combined Tiamat and Absu within fill me with an understanding of self-responsibility as opposed to following a god, and this leads me to a desire to greater express the union with the eternity as opposed to with Tiamat. I began to see myself as part of the eternity and finally fully understand this as opposed to just paying it lip service or trying to describe a feeling. So this is the point where I really get it. So September 2024, I attempt a video called How Have You Been, where I try to talk about what is happening to me, but I feel like it barely gets across what's going on with me, though some people seem to understand completely. I also review Veritas Tiamat and realize everything I channeled there now makes more sense to me and is shockingly real to me. And then I put out the video expressing that. And it's important to recognize that this is the point. September of this year is when I finally was like, oh shit, all that stuff I said a year ago, that's real. Like the mother-father dynamic, all this, like whatever it had said, like I just finally went through that process. The channeling a year prior was like to me to tell me what I needed to do. And now that I've done it, I'm like, oh shit, that was real. That's where I'm at in September of 2024. October 2024, in search of greater unity with the eternity, I set up a ritual to induce ego death, though the ego does return after, during which I am shown that my next steps will be the path of the gods. This is what we're talking about in that video. I'm also forbidden from using rituals and ritual tools any further, and even told not to use the names of the gods specifically. I didn't bring this up in that video, though. But to call them within the self as forces archetypes to understand those forces archetypes within the self. The idea is that understanding these parts of the whole will bring greater understanding of the whole overall, rather than acting toward these beings as masters. So, I purposely didn't bring this up in that video because I didn't want to skew the concept of what the path of the gods was into how I was doing it, so much as just give a brief overview. And I figured any of the rest of that could come later. But basically, because I see myself and everything as the eternity, the gods are not greater or lesser than us. They're aspects of that eternity. So interacting with them is not the same as for someone who, say, has an altar, because I'm not even allowed to use an altar. This is why these tools are not allowed. I am not allowed to treat them that way. The path is not a ritual-based path. The path is not a magic-based path. This is a path of understanding these aspects of reality and then integrating them in a way that allows you to balance yourself. So if there's a warrior and there is a healer, they both need equal parts integrated into the self so that you don't become too violent or too altruistic. You have to understand all of these aspects come with positive and negative aspects that need to be balanced within the self and in the world. It makes it sound psychological if I just say it that way, which is why, again, I haven't made a video on it, because I'm like, I don't know how to exactly express this, because it's not just in the self. It seems the as within, so without is making more sense to me now, too. All of these concepts of things that I've spouted, these sayings of old, these traditions of old, but just because I'm reading it, now they make sense. That's the difference. November 2024, as part of my research into the gods, I review my old work with them and old studies. I find with this new understanding, I can finally fully understand what the mother and father archetypes were to the peoples of old. While I have recited this sort of thing before, I've never experienced their union prior to the past few months, and I finally understand beyond knowing why this interplay is important in Western occultism. My studies take me into detail with other archetypal forces as well, and I construct diagrams that end up showing me similar relationships to the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah and to the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. These archetypes need to be balanced within the self to bring about a form of right living. However, this gnosis does not feel ready to share with anyone outside of my journals during this time, so remains nothing more than a footnote to be added to a video right here. So I have basically been given a list of specific gods to work with. I call them by archetypal names rather than god names, and I find that they map perfectly onto concepts of the Sephiroth of Kabbalah, and they also map onto the 8 different things that you're supposed to do in the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. So I am looking into Kabbalah and Buddhism as part of this, but I'm still taking it from a weird Western occultist standpoint. There is still this process going on. My belief, and this is big hold back on this, my belief of where this is going is that I am supposed to understand these archetypes conceptually and then internally enough to recognize those aspects of the self and keep them in balance. And once I do that, I'll no longer be calling gods, but I'll rather be balancing the self and then recognizing those same imbalances in others and in the world and things like that. And as a result, I'll have a better capability of helping people and helping others without needing to think about it in this way. But for now, I need these steps. I need to use the gods, the archetypes, to get there. So this is a process that I'm using because it's what my internal lexicon has been built on for years, because I started in the occult side, guys. So this is what's really kind of going on. Now, why not just say that? Because again, I'm new. This started end of October. It's the end of December. I've had 2 months in this. It's a little early for me to tell you where it's going, right? But for people who think that it's circling and not going anywhere new, this may not sound positive. We'll see. December 2024, I leave my job, feeling completely unable to will myself to do the work it requires out of a sense of needing to act in ways that improve life for all rather than improve the already rich. I find much of what I once thought was fine is no longer acceptable behavior for myself as a growing sense of responsibility for the greater good starts to fill me. Though this may sound self-righteous to some, or like I'm describing a positive form of growth to others, neither is true. It's more like a tug of war is going on between doing what's easy and taking responsibility, as someone who knows better now. It's understanding that this union comes with the responsibility to work to improve things in this world, not to simply improve the self. This is the struggle I'm actually going through. I am currently unemployed by choice because I just couldn't, and prior to the October ritual, I did not have that problem. This change is pushing me in a way that I'm not in love with, but I understand the reason. And of course, I didn't bring this up in the video because I don't want to talk about not having a job. I don't want to talk about any of this shit. That's not where I want to go with my video. I just wanted to be like, here's the new stuff that I'm sure of. Here, if you guys wanted to see the dirty bits, this is where I'm actually at. This is what's actually going on. I'm in a weird state where I'm learning a bunch of weird stuff about myself, and it's pushing me in a new direction. Not just in a new direction in what I talk about, not just in a new direction spiritually, but in a new direction, period. So, stagnant? No. For the better? Not sure. But different. So I hope that kind of better explains where I'm at and why I'm hesitant to talk about what any of this means, being that it's only been 2 months for me. And I hope it makes sense that I was kind of trying with my other video to get you to understand that I'm going to start going over here in the future and talking about, gods and differences between the way people treat them and the way that they should be looked at, things like that. I don't even know if I'm going to get into that. Honestly, I've started writing stuff in a journal, and it's made it so I don't even feel the need to make these videos. And I made the other video because I kept getting asked questions about Tiamat, and I was like, guys, I ain't on that anymore. Like, as much as I love it, I'll still talk to you about Tiamat all day. I experienced it. I don't have that same relationship now. It's completely different now. And when I saw the things that were like, hey, this is stagnant, this is repeating, I was like, you know what? I didn't share where I'm at. Obviously. So I felt that need. I need to come in here and tell you what's actually going on, because you guys have been kind of a solid foundation for me, helping point me in the directions of resources and this and that. This is where I'm at. This is what's going on. If you've got suggestions, you feel free to leave them in the comments. But also something I want to ask you guys is, what should I do with this channel? Obviously, I'm going to leave it up. I've learned my lesson. I'm not deleting something just because I'm done with it. This is going to stay as a testimonial of whatever the fuck. You guys can find these videos for as long as they don't remove them. But I don't post very often. I post like once every 3 months, if that. And like I said, the journal is kind of filling in for that spot for me. I no longer feel like I need to make a video to express myself, because I'm using the journal on almost a daily basis and expressing myself there and finding like new interesting information about this process every day. I'm putting in research that I'm finding about different things every day. I'm recognizing these different connections between the old religions I used to study and how they all kind of point to the same thing. I'm going down that rabbit hole, but I don't really have a lot to say about it that be new to you. So I don't feel the need to make a video. Now, obviously, if I ever come across something really cool, I'm going to make a video on it. But like, in the meantime, what do you guys want? Should I just chill out on the videos and deal with my own shit? Do you want to hear more about just some weird day-to-day shit that I'm going through? Do you guys want skits again, like in the past, because they're fun? Do you guys want music? I like doing it, but nobody seems to like it that much. It's a little off kilter, but I like that. Helps me with some shadow work. I'm open to any of those things, but at the same time, I'm also open to just chilling. And you might hear from me like twice a year. I don't know, because I really feel like this process I'm going through right now, it's life-changing, extreme to me. It feels like I'm finally on the path I was supposed to go on back in the Grand Infinity days. But it's very personal, this journey. It's not like something I feel like talking a bunch about. So, what do you suggest? Put it in the comments. I'm curious. That should explain exactly where I've been through all that time. Right now, I'm dealing my own struggles. I'm learning who I am again. It's another one of those moments. I'm starting to feel this responsibility for others, this responsibility for making things better, not worse. That doesn't mean I need to be someone important. It doesn't mean that I need to be some leader of men. And some people will hear that and think what I mean is like, oh, I need to learn how to help people spiritually. Actually, the way that I'm being pulled is that I need to just help, like physically. It's not a spiritual thing. It's like, hey, put more positive forward than negative. When something comes up, maybe it's more important to help someone else than help yourself. That type of stuff is starting to happen. But I also have the opposed part connected in there that says you got to take care of yourself too. So I'm not super altruistic like someone on the path of light and love, but I'm also not super self-centered like I have been for many years. I'm starting to get this at a very deep level that helping everyone else is helping myself. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that and make a living. But I don't want to do that through spirituality. I don't feel like I'm in a place to be that teacher guy, and I've never felt like that's something for me. I feel like if you were that guy, you would feel that call. I feel the call to discuss it with people who will listen, which is why I'm on here. Because most of the people I know in like a day-to-day job, I'm not going to talk to about this stuff. I needed a place to talk about it. I feel like the stuff I'm dealing with now is a little less crazy sounding than the stuff from before, but it's still pretty crazy if you take it all into context. So I don't know. I need people who understand it to hear it. People be like, yeah, I've been there. I just want somebody to put a hand on your shoulder and be like, it's all right. It gets better. Like that type of shit. You know what I mean? That's where I'm at. Hope you guys have a good 2025. And I hope my 2025 is bright as well. As we move down our own paths through our own time. And until next time, safe travels.